What's on your mind? Yeah.
Does, in the context of foreknowledge and divine providence, does free will really matter?
Yeah, it really matters. And we have a literature on foreknowledge and free will, which preserves free will. And the literature is split into two approaches. One approach is to examine carefully what seems to be the problem and to find that in the problem there's a logical fallacy, and therefore the problem can be overcome, can be solved. That solution relies on a particular assumption, and not everybody agrees to it, but in logic it works. And the other approach is to say that since God is not describable, not conceivable, strictly speaking, we won't say that he knows. Of course, we won't say that he's ignorant either. That would be another description. He's beyond what we would call knowledge and ignorance, and therefore the problem can't be raised. Those are the two approaches that you find in our literature. And maybe I'll sketch the first one for you just so you see how it goes. The second one requires some more background. The problem is this. When I make a decision, I picture myself as having alternatives. Let's make it simple. Think there are two, A and B. I can do A and I can do B. Each one of them is within my power. When the time comes and I choose A, I could just as well have chosen B. My choice made A happen. My choice could have made B happen. That's the way it seems to me. The skeptic says, do you believe in God? And I say, I wouldn't wear a hat like this if I didn't believe in God. And he says, well, do you believe that God knows everything? He's omniscient? Yes, I do. Do you believe that he was omniscient yesterday? Yes, I do. Well, that means that yesterday already he knew that today you were going to do A. Yeah, I guess it does. Right. Yesterday he must have known that I was going to do A. Well, says the skeptic, if that's correct, yesterday he knew that you were going to do A, could you really do B? What would doing B mean? Wouldn't it mean it would be contradicting God's knowledge? Surely you can't contradict God's knowledge. You couldn't even have the possibility of doing B, because that would be the possibility of contradicting God's knowledge. Isn't God's knowledge perfect? Isn't it infallible? So, really, you didn't have two alternatives. You really didn't have two choices that were within your power. Really, the only thing that you could do is A. So if that's what you think free will is, you have a problem with God's foreknowledge. That's the way the problem is put in the Rambam. In the first half of the 20th century, there was some effort by philosophers to formulate the problem, and in the end they came up with the Rambam's formulation, not having read the Rambam, of course. Notice the problem with God's foreknowledge is not, how did I do A? It's not that since he knew I was going to do A, he forced me to do A, caused me to do A. No, that's not the problem. The problem is only you didn't have an alternative. Doing B would have been impossible, and therefore you didn't really have two alternatives. And if you express free will, as some people do, as free choice, choosing, that turns out to be problematic. Because for there to be a choice, there has to be more than one thing that you could do. That's the way the problem should be put. Well, let me try to sketch intuitively, in two different ways, what's wrong with the way the problem is put. First of all, let's talk about real history. Real history is, I did A, and God knew that I was going to do A. That's what happened in the real world. Someone asks, could I have done B? He's not asking about the real world. In the real world, B is just out. It means another world a virtual world, what we call a possible world, where instead of doing A, I did B. And now the question is whether that possible world is coherent or not, whether it suffers from some kind of contradiction or not. And here's the way he puts it. Well, in the real world, you did A, and yesterday God knew you were going to do A. Now let's think about a possible world in which you do B instead of A. In that possible world, doing B today, what shall we put in that possible world yesterday? What shall we put in that possible world about God's knowledge yesterday? This isn't the real world, this is the possible world. The one we think it's possible, or maybe it isn't. Maybe it contains a contradiction. So the critic says, well, in the real world yesterday God knew A, so in the possible world we're also going to put in God knew A. You are you? You're going to put in God knew A. Congratulations. So now, having put God's knowledge of A in that possible world, and putting my doing B in that possible world, then you have a contradiction. But you just put it there. You just put it there. You can't convict the son of a contradiction by putting things in the way you like. Suppose I say, in our world, I do A, and God knew yesterday I'm going to do A. In that possible world where I do B, yesterday God knows I'm going to do B instead of A. And then there's no problem. You changed what I really do in that possible world. Maybe that brings along with it a change in what God knows in that possible world. And there's no contradiction. What you see here is that to generate the contradiction, the critic has to stick in his own assumption without really explaining why or explaining where it comes from. And if we doubt that assumption, then the problem goes away. That's one way to see that there's something wrong with the way the critic is approaching the question. Another way to see it is the way Bertrand Russell did. Bertrand Russell wasn't any friend of ours. He was a famous atheist. But he said, at least don't try to beat up the religious believer with this problem, because this problem has a simple solution. So far, no one has asked, how did God know yesterday what's going to happen today? How did God get his foreknowledge, his advanced knowledge? Well, God is God, Who knows how he got it? Well, here's a suggestion. Maybe God got his knowledge of today on yesterday by getting a sneak peek at the future. On yesterday, today's Monday, Sunday, he took a look at Monday and saw me choosing A. And that's how he got his knowledge on Sunday that on Monday I would do A. He saw me. He observed me. Now you say, well, how can you see the future? And I say, you and I can't, but we're talking about God, right? If you imagine that's the procedure by which God gets his knowledge of the future, then the solution I just mentioned is built in. Because in the possible world where I do B, the day before I do B, he looks ahead and sees me doing B, and then he'll know that I'm going to do B. So in our real world, I do A and he knows A, and in the possible world, I do B and he knows B, and there's no contradiction anywhere. This is a solution to the problem. The problem is supposed to be conviction that we're guilty of a contradiction. We're not. You built the contradiction by making an assumption which is free and not correct. We don't have to accept it. That's roughly the way the solution goes. Yeah.
Does that mean information can travel back in time?
Well, yes, it does. But I should tell you that in quantum mechanics, there are experiments in which some, like Richard Feynman and John Wheeler and others, interpret as causality going backwards in time, because those are the simplest interpretations. And it's something which at least some physicists think happen in the real world. Certainly, we have many more degrees of freedom in describing the way God interacts with the world than we have in terms of just the physics of the real world. And they think that it's real, that this causal interaction goes backwards in time. You can look that up. It's on the net. There are a lot of experiments that have been done like that. So the tricky problem here is this. This description of how God gets his knowledge makes God affected by what we do. I choose A, and thereby he comes to know that I do A. My choice of A causes his knowledge that I do A. And there are those who are against that idea in principle. Among them, Maimonides, who says over and over again in the guide, God is not well, in the Hebrew, mispa'el. He's not affected by anything. Sometimes he says, because if he were affected, that would imply change, but sometimes he doesn't. Just the very idea that something causes some reality in God, something which he dismisses entirely. Well, then this solution isn't going to be available to him. And the Rabbi knows that, because in the guide he says, he's speaking about a certain group of Arabic philosophers, and he says that they believe that God has foreknowledge and that man has free will, and the little thought will make it clear to you that that's a contradiction. So he simply dismisses the idea that you can assert both of them. But for entirely different reasons, he says God is not describable at all, and he explicitly says we can't describe anything that could be called God's knowledge, because God is beyond all description, and therefore we won't say that God knows. And as I mentioned at the outset, that doesn't mean we're saying God's ignorant. Ignorant is another description. Knows is a description. Ignorant is a description. We're swearing off all descriptions. That being the case, the problem can't be raised. So a problem for which, on the one hand, you have a solution, and on the other hand, can't be raised, is not a problem over which you lose a lot of sleep. That's the bottom line.
So it sounds like God's foreknowledge is sort of dependent on what we do. So when we're born, I'm assuming everything isn't already kind of known. Like maybe there's like a tree of decisions that lead to different paths based on how you use your free will. So that's where the
Well, given as he pointed out, we're picturing the knowledge traveling backwards in time, right? So it was known. Just like it could be known yesterday, could be known last year, or last decade, or last century, right? Once it's going back in time, it's not limited to 24 hours.
So is there a difference between known and predetermined?
Sure. That's why I said what I said at the outset. There's a knowledge pictures the subject of the knowledge as totally passive. To talk about his knowledge is not to imply that he does anything. Just he knows. And the problem is built on knowledge. The knowledge itself seems to make the alternative impossible. So this is just a picture of, can God's knowledge be reconciled with our free will? When you add in that he's active in running the world, that's a different question with a different treatment. But that's not the problem that you mentioned. It's not the famous problem that's raised under the title Foreknowledge and Free Will. Yeah.
Does academically have to go back in time to know the decisions we're going to make, or does he already know, like the choices we make before we make them?
Okay, I didn't say he went back in time.
Yeah.
I didn't say that. He exists. Insofar as we talk this way at all, he exists at all times. He just does exist at all times. So he doesn't have to go anywhere. It's not as if he's in this place and has to go to that place. His existence covers all times. Yeah.
Last week we talked about the Porsche example, about the guy who asks for a Porsche to pick up someone at the bus station. I don't remember when that was, what day that was, but yeah. Obviously, for the price of one Porsche, you could buy 3 school buses and take everyone, and, you know.
Yeah, we didn't mention that, but you're quite right.
Right, so I just want to know, is there anything wrong with wanting nice things for the sake of just having nice things? Or will Hashem only give it to us if he knows it'll somehow strengthen our, or whatever, or give us the test of wealth if he thinks we can pass? I don't really know how to phrase it. It's just like,
Yeah.
Anybody would want nice things and a nice life and a big house or whatever, you know, the big American white picket fence life.
Yeah.
Is it okay to just want that for the sake of wanting that? Because it's hard to frame that in terms of, I'm going to serve Hashem because I have 3 bathrooms, not 1 bathroom.
Okay, so first of all, let me give you a crude parallel. Parallels are only similar and identical. People are always fond of saying, but it's not similar in this sense, right? It's not 100% identical. Let's imagine that someone's fighting a war, and he's using an M16 rifle or something. He says, listen, I want an M16 rifle with a picture of the Rocky Mountains on it. You know, I like the gun to be sort of inspiring and depict strength and permanence and so forth. I want one with a picture on it. I think we would feel you're fighting a battle. If you lose the battle, it's going to be a disaster. You should be thinking about shooting the enemy. You really shouldn't be thinking about the design of the gun, right? Yeah, and from my point of view, there's a one-dimensional goal, and that is serving the Creator. Everything else gets into your life because it plays some role in serving the Creator. Now, serving the Creator embraces all of life. We spoke about this once. From our point of view, service of the Creator includes two dimensions. Ramchal says this. One is the mitzvos, the commandments that he gave us. The other is everything that's necessary in order to be able to perform the commandments as well as possible. Well, and both of them are called service of the Creator. So when you're earning money to be able to buy the necessities of life so as to be able to do a mitzvah, you're serving the Creator. When you sleep in order to be rested enough to be able to do the mitzvahs that he wants you to do, then the sleeping is called serving the Creator. If you exercise, like I do and others do, in order to not only contribute to your physical health, but when you exercise, you feel differently. You're more relaxed, you're more focused, and so on and so on. And then you can use your relaxed attitude and your focus to do God's mitzvahs better and thereby serve Him better. Then exercise also becomes serving God. So the false picture that people have, well, religion is like maybe 15% of your life over here, and then there's your job, and then your family, and then sport, and there's all those things. And somebody says, wait a minute, religion is the whole thing. He thinks, well, I'm giving away 85%. No, the 15% expands to embrace the 85%, so that it covers the whole ground. Now, yes, it does prohibit certain things. If you're really committed to running guns to the Palestinians, you'll have to think that one over again. Or, selling drugs or doing drugs and so forth and so on. Then you'll have to think that over. Right, there are certain limitations. But beyond those limitations, the way in which you perform all those other activities and the hierarchy of preference that you give to them is dedicated to that goal. So to want something just for itself, other than wanting to use it in serving God, from our point of view, is a mistake. It's a distraction. It's not contributing to the overwhelmingly important goal which we were created for and designed for, and which will be our ultimate success.
But you brought up the example of the M16, right? If you're in the jungle in Vietnam, like, you're probably gonna be able to aim much better with an M16 than something else. But every unit also has like a big guy holding a belt-fed gun, and do you know what I'm talking about? Like the big. I don't forget what it's called exactly. I'm saying like he's got like
a machine gun.
A belt of bullets around his neck, and he's holding a big machine gun with a mount. Or he could mount it, right?
Right.
And it's like, is that just not the Jewish way to have a big gun and just do you know what I'm saying? Like.
Yeah, but for example, if I would take the thought, what are you going to do with it? Go to the country fair and show it off, and wow people. Right. I mean, the gun's for shooting. It's for shooting at the enemy, right? If it shoots better than an M16, then get a bigger gun. No question about it. But so you're talking about having the house with the white picket fence, cause I want that house, not dedicated to anything else. It's how shall I say? It's sort of like, imagine a person who's getting a medical education, and you say to him, why are you getting a medical education? Because I like to learn it. What are you going to do with it? Probably collect driftwood, and sell it on the open market. You're going to be able to heal people, save people's lives, and you're going to spend your life collecting driftwood? Sorry, I don't get it. Isn't healing people and saving their lives important to you? Don't you think that's an important value? I mean, you're just going to learn all of it and create all that capability and not use it? Something missing in the person's sense of priorities, if that's what he's doing, seems to me.
Okay, so can I phrase it a different direction then?
Sure.
What if that's one way to think. What if your wife just says like, I want a nice car. Just for the sake of having a nice car. Is there anything wrong with having a nice car?
So you have to ask yourself what it's for. I'll tell you the actual example that's happened to me. There was a young couple, I think they had 3 kids. Neither came from a religious family. And because of that, one of the things that happens at a religious wedding is that the wife's family buys a set of the Talmud for the husband. That's the main focus of yeshiva learning. Well, he didn't have one because neither family was religious and they didn't invest in that. They were saving money for it. And when they were getting close to the amount of money they needed, the wife said to the husband, I'd like to take the money and use it to redecorate the apartment. So he came to me and he said, how can I convince her that buying a set of the Talmud is more important than redecorating the apartment? So I said to him, suppose she had told you that she has migraine headaches, and the only medicine that works for her comes from Switzerland, and it will take all the money you save for the Talmud in order to buy the medicine for her migraine headaches. What would you say? He said, migraine headaches? Of course, no question. We spend it on the medicine. I said, listen, she's making a home for you and your 3 children. She's spending a lot of time in that home. And she's telling you that she's not happy there. She's not happy where she's spending her time. I think you should be prepared to spend the money on her happiness. Why? Is there a mitzvah to be happy? Well, no, there isn't a mitzvah to be happy, but when you're happy, you will do the other mitzvahs better. And she knows that. And if she's depressed or irritated most of the time, so she's going to be short with the kids, and she's going to be short with you, and her prayers aren't going to be the same prayers, and when she studies some Torah, she's not going to be able to assimilate it in the same way. She feels her whole spiritual life degraded, and she needs this redecoration in order to elevate her spiritual life. Maimonides writes about this in the 5th chapter of the 8 chapters of Introduction to Pirkei Avos, if you want to see it there. So you have to be very broad-minded about what impact a certain set of part of your life or actions of your life has in the long run on your ability to do the mitzvahs that God wants you to do. If you do that, a lot of the things that you might have thought were inappropriate become appropriate. Okay, I mean that's.
So this is my last follow-up. It's a quick one. Sorry, fellas. Okay, so if that's the case, then how do we avoid thinking like almost like a Calvinist, where I have nice things, therefore God likes me?
Oh, that's really an entirely different question, and I'll tell you right away. There's a verse in Proverbs. It says, I'm afraid of 2 things. Lest I become impoverished and steal, lest I become wealthy and deny God. So the Talmud comments, let's see, what is the downside of poverty? A person's honesty is tested. What's the downside of being very successful? Taking credit for the success yourself, thinking you made it for yourself. You did it for yourself, denying divine providence and thinking that I made it. That's denying God's divine providence. Which is worse, stealing or denying divine providence? Denying divine providence is much worse. It's much worse. So the Talmud concludes that the test of wealth is much more difficult and dangerous than the test of poverty. So a person may have a lot because God's testing him to see whether he can pass the test. And a person may not have because God is protecting him from that test because he doesn't want him to fail. There are many, many reasons why a person has or doesn't have. And it's simply not the case that God gives to the ones who he loves and deprives those who don't. Maybe the greatest, one of the greatest examples of this is that in the verses of the Torah, it's clear that all the 4 matriarchs were barren. And according to the oral tradition, the patriarchs were also barren. And if you thought, and this was part of Hagar's problem, if you thought that God gives to the ones whom he loves, then you'd say he must hate them. He made them all barren. What a cruel thing to do. He must hate them. No, as a matter of fact, he didn't hate them. He loved them a lot. He wanted their whole reproductive life to be miraculous. Only miraculous. Nothing natural about it. And therefore he made them barren. So the fact that someone doesn't have doesn't mean that God is depriving him because he doesn't like him. So he's angry at him, or he's done something wrong. It doesn't follow. Yeah, who's next? Yeah.
How much of the literal phrasing of a prayer matters versus the intent behind it? So, for example, if you were praying, say you want an organization to condemn some act, setting aside the free will aspect, but you accidentally say, I want them to condone this act by mistake. Would they still condemn it? Would it be counted as that?
No, the meaning of your expressed wish to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is what you understand, not what you said. However, if you do stumble that way, leaving Uncle Sigmund in the dust where he belongs, and I'm not bringing Freud in here, but we would think that you should ask yourself why it came out that way.
I get the two words confused a lot.
Okay, so then
Yeah.
if that's true, then no, certainly not. It's not going.
Yeah.
But I would say this: you have to be careful about what you say because you might not take into account the various different ways what you say could become true. Let's suppose you have a person who's 73 and he's suffering various old age ailments. He says to somebody else, "Gee, I hope you don't go through this." That might mean he'll die at 70. I don't know if that's better. Yeah, so you have to be very careful about what you say and to think, I don't want to leave my prayer open to realizations that I wouldn't have wanted. And in fact, in certain cases, it may not be appropriate to specify the outcome that you want at all. We had, my first wife and I had a relative got involved with a Karaite. And we asked our Rabbi, what should we pray for? He should meet some charismatic Jewish cure personality or a book or have a disappointment. And he said, don't tell God what to do. Just ask God to help. That's all. I thought, okay. Leave it up to him to decide how he wants to take care of it.
And there's part two, like if you were say like there was a house burning down, it's like I want someone to get out of the house, and so you say like I want to make sure that they get out of the house. You leave the part safely, and so that the house like explodes and they get launched out of the house. That's them getting out of the house.
Not what you wanted.
Yeah,
But so what you really wanted was someone should be saved and not killed in the house.
Yeah.
That's all. It could happen that the ground floor will break and they'll fall down into the cellar. And in the cellar there's a tunnel.
But in the case where they leave out something like get out of the house, they phrase it in a sense where it leads to. So
look, if a 7-year-old prays and he prays in an immature way, which you'd expect from a 7-year-old, God's not going to say, "Ha ha, he said that, bang, I gotcha," right? God's not unfair that way. God's not unjust that way. But you want to take responsibility for what you do, in particular what you say, and you should try to do that. Yeah.
So it's kind of a two-part, not really two-part question, but it's on two things. So when a person prays, is it better for the person to pray? Like, let's say they're praying for other people. Should they pray for a person specific, or should they just pray for all Klal Yisroel?
Both. They should definitely pray specifically also. Absolutely.
And so then obviously for yourself when you're.
That's right. But you said it well. In other words, the initial address is, please do this for the Jewish people. And then you say, these people are also part of the Jewish people, and these people in particular need X, Y, Z. But they get in as part of the general population of the Jewish people. That's the same thing is true when you come to stand before God in prayer. If you imagine, like you're going to the throne room before the king on the throne, and there's the guardian angel there, and he says, "You want to come in? Who are you?" He said, "I'm Ruvain Schwartz." Come back next week. The next one says, "Who are you?" He says, "I'm Rabbi Yid, I'm a Jew." "Oh, you're a Jew?" By all means, please come in. God sees Jews. If you come as an individual, you're going to have a problem. If you say, "I'm a representative of the Jewish people," and you're playing for the Jewish people, then you always have an audience. You always have an audience. More so if you come with 10. But That's why all the prayers in the plural. All the official text of the prayers in the plural. Nothing in the singular.
Rabbi, how do we reconcile Torah with modern science, especially regarding creation and evolution?
Well, I'm glad that this class is scheduled to finish at 7:30, because it's creation and evolution. We should do them all in one. I'll say very little bit. This is supposed to be like 3 or 4 minutes of an answer. If you really want to go through the details, there is a book called God, Chazal, and Science, written by one of my teachers, by Moshiach, which is 900 pages long, and he does deal with a great many of the problems of modern science. But let me say 2 things. First of all, up until 1965, we had a much bigger difficulty with creation, because until 1965, all scientific and philosophical opinion agreed that the world has no beginning at all. None whatsoever. The universe always was and always will be. The laws of nature are necessary, and they describe it the way it is. You have a little hint of this. It's not really true anymore, but in the conservation laws, conservation of mass energy means you start an experiment with a certain amount of mass energy, do all your shenanigans, and then measure at the end. It's always exactly the same. And if you apply that to the universe, which you shouldn't, because you did it in a laboratory with closed walls, and applying it to the universe is just an irresponsible leap of faith. But if you do that, it means nothing gets in and nothing gets out, so the universe can't change in the whole, right? And if we say there was a creation, that's a big problem. Today, it's just a matter of 13.8 billion years versus 6,000 years. It's just a matter of number of years. But the very fact that the world has a beginning, according to many, and I would say the most responsible opinion, means that qualitative barrier is overcome. And it's overcome because science was dead wrong about it. Dead wrong about something really big and really important. And the book that had it right is a book written by those primitive, ancient, superstitious, partly illiterate savages, with their myths and so forth and so on. They got it right, and science philosophy got it wrong. I think there's a lesson there. Maybe the reconciliation shouldn't be, how can we make Judaism over again to make it more scientific? Maybe we should be a little more critical of the science. When it comes to evolution, I believe that there is no good reason to think that evolution is true. And let me just say, I'm trained in philosophy of mathematics, so when I say what I choose my words carefully. I didn't say it was false. I didn't say we know it's false. I said there's no good reason to think that it's true. And I'll tell you why I don't think that there's a good reason to think that it's true. Let me give you an analogy, and then I'll tell you how it applies here. Someone says to you, I have a physical object, and on one side, I made an X. I threw the object into the air 3 times with no guidance, no special way, and it landed on the X 3 times in a row just by accident. It just happened that way. Do you believe him? He says no, he's in doubt. Very rare. Really. Haven't I left out a crucial piece of information?
How many sides are on the dice?
How many sides are on the object? I said object, I didn't say die. I said object, right? I left out how many sides are on the object. It's a coin. It's 1 in 8. It's 12.5%. That's not going to be so rare. That'll happen, like more than 1/10 of the time. So if he says it happened, wouldn't be terrible to believe that. If it's a shilling with 1,000 sides, you probably aren't going to believe it, right? Suppose he says, I'm not telling you how many sides the object has. What should your response be? You don't have enough information to make up your mind whether to believe it or not. Somebody says that something happened without guidance, without management. The word random has 6 different definitions, but that's the idea here. Nothing is guiding it and predestining an outcome. And then to decide whether it will happen, did happen, you want to know what its probability is. Well, that's the way they describe the development of life on this planet, those who believe in evolution. It's something which is unguided, unmanaged, unsupervised. It happens. just by the natural circumstances coming together. Well, the first thing I want to know is, what's the probability of that happening? Try it. Ask Claude, or GPT if you want to spend your money. Ask what the probability is. No one has a clue what the probability is. No one has a clue. Well, if they don't supply a probability, then they have not given me enough information to make up my mind whether it's true or false. That's why I say there's no adequate reason to think that it's true. There are those who think that they can prove it's false because of one corner of the development, which they can define fairly precisely in mathematical terms. David Gerlernter is a professor of computer science at Yale. So I suppose he's not dumb. I suppose. And I suppose he knows math if he's a professor of computer science. And he claims that a certain type of protein development, if you take the probability of it's happening by Darwinian processes, it would take trillions of years, and therefore it's just out of the question. But those who believe in evolution at least owe us a probability of the procedure taking place that way, and since they don't provide it, there's no good reason to think that it's true. So I think that those are two things to start thinking about in this discussion. There's a lot more to say, and there's a lot more that's been said. Yeah.
Do you have any hope for secular academia becoming sane again in America? Because I don't know if I had one normal professor my entirety of college.
Yeah, that's because of the college you went to. Listen, let me just give you a little background on this, right? There were thousands of students rioting for students who were enforcing political correctness and everything else. Thousands, tens of thousands, at hundreds of universities, right? How many institutions of post-high school learning are there in the United States of America? 6,000. 6,000. 5,999, according to Google, right? That's a lot. How many had riots? How many have the group for the justice in Palestine, all those there? 300? 600? 900? How many had out of 6,000? There are millions of post-high school students. How many of those? Columbia University, where all the riots were, you know how many students Columbia University has? 36,000. How many of the 36,000 were involved? Well, in the riots, there were like 300, 150 of whom weren't students. They came from off campus. That's not a big number. It's not a big number. So the fact that certain big universities get a lot of press about this, I'm not convinced that it saturated the whole American educational establishment. I'm not convinced of that, number one. Number two, there are already reactions. Trump has wiped the floor with them. Universities are canceling their DEI departments. They're canceling their contracts of that kind. They're canceling DEI requirements for hiring. Many have canceled them. University of Michigan, for example. And then you have this new university in Austin, Texas, which is dedicated to free speech. And they've got some disaffected professors from other universities who felt confined by the woke culture. I don't think it's hopeless at all. I think big industry, a lot of the big firms have stopped. Amazon stopped the DEI business. I mean, a lot of big people are turning around because the bottom line is money, right? And if you're not going to make money, you're not going to get federal grants, and the people are going to boycott you. What happened to that beer that still hasn't recovered?
Bud Light?
Yeah, Bud Light still hasn't recovered. It was the most popular brand in the country, and it isn't. So I think there's hope. I think that this craziness can turn a corner, and it depends upon how things are managed and how it's preserved. One of the hopeful things that people have said is that it isn't just Trump, it's Trumpism, and his vice president is a genuine intellectual, and he's going through a very important, impressive personal journey, and he could be groomed as a successor. And then you're talking about a continuing movement, not something which at the end of Trump's second term would come to an end. So certainly much saner with him in there than it was before. So I've not given up. I've not given up hope. Yeah, it's there have been leftists since the 70s, but I've not given up hope.
Do you?
Yeah.
I heard that like the oral tradition for the Torah includes everything. Like one example, I know that Tosfos has a proof for the square root of 2 being irrational. And so, do things like that come from directly from Hashem, or do those things come from partially observing the natural world and kind of like adding it into the oral tradition?
Oh, you mean, well, okay. Okay, I was going to play with your words, but maybe I won't do that. No, I don't believe that Hashem dictated this proof of the irrationality square root of 2 by the way, it isn't a proof of the irrationality. It's a proof that it's not 1.4.
Oh, okay.
It's only proof that it's not 1.4. It's a geometrical proof. Irrationality of the square root of 2 was proved by the Greeks 2,500 years ago. But I think what's interesting is, and I don't know where Tosfos got it from. I don't know whether he saw it in some of it, but it's printed in 2 editions of 2 places in the Talmud. You have it in the Talmud. And the attitude that we have towards it, if it's included in the Talmud, then it counts as studying Torah. So this piece of geometrical information, trigonometrical information, becomes part of Torah. And I think that's the fact that there is such a proof, because 1.4 is the figure that's used in all of our calculations. So Tosfos saw fit to show that it's not exact. You should know it's not exact. But you see, God can be responsible for it even if you got it from observing it in nature or thinking of how the geometry would work, because God is involved in our thought processes as well. We wouldn't say either God revealed it to us or we got it from something else that isn't God. We wouldn't accept that alternative. We would say He gave it to us this way or gave it to us that way.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking, but there's no like prophecy of like the
No,
square root of 2.
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. No. In fact, I'll say something else. The Gemara describes an experiment that was carried out to see whether the ants have a leader or not. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the experiment. It was kind of elaborate. But Tosfos on the spot says, why did they go through this experiment? Because they wanted to know how Solomon knows, because he says so in I think in Proverbs, that they do or do not have a king. They want to know how he knows. Tosfos said, how did he know? That's very dramatic. They took it for granted that Solomon knew it by observing the world. And they were trying to figure out whether this experiment would be the way that he knew. And it went into one of the books that's has the imprimatur of being part of the Bible. Yeah, what else is on?
I have more.
Yeah, okay.
So say in a case of Kidushin, if you said, you'll be married to me on the condition that this condition prevents us from being married. It's like a paradoxical thing. Could you...
I have a better paradox for you if you want, but
Please.
let me say 1 second. Well, I think that well, the condition itself has no content. You see, you said the condition makes it impossible. That's something that it has as an effect, but it doesn't tell me what its content is. So as it stands, the condition has no content, and I would say it's null and void. You all know about the logical paradox when you say this sentence is false. Philosophers who have nothing better to do examine the sentence, this sentence is true. That's a tricky one. Certainly not false, certainly not a question of being a contradiction. What's the status of this sentence is true? I asked GPT. GPT was all over the map. It was just all over the map. It was crazy. Twice it said, oh, this sentence is false, it's a liar paradox, and if it's true, it's false, if false, it's true. I said, yeah, but I said true, not false. Yeah, because a liar paradox, it said a second time, And then I said, well, I didn't write false, I wrote true. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah, true. I asked, is it true? And he said, yeah, it's true. I said, why is it true? Because it says it's true. That's why it's true. I'd like to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge, actually. The problem with that sentence is it's a perfectly well-formed English sentence, but it seems to have no content. The truth or falsity of sentences usually depends upon, they say something about the world, so you could take a look at the world. Is it really like that or isn't it? So here's the one we're talking about. This sentence is true. What should you look at? The weather, the price of the dollar, microsurgery. What should you look at to test whether this thing fits the world? It just doesn't say anything about the world. It just says it is true. So it's very difficult to think that has any content whatsoever. And I think some will say it's not true, it's not false, it's just not a candidate. It's something, like the cat eating its own tail. Ultimately, you can't get nourishment that way. So, but the one that's used is this. A fellow says to the woman, you're married, we'll be married with this ring, on condition that for the next 30 days, you don't be married to anyone else. Okay? And on day 15, she goes through a marriage ceremony with George. What is she on day 16?
Married.
Married? To whom?
The other guy.
To the second guy.
Yeah.
Well, let's see now. If she's married to the second guy, then when the first guy divorced her and made a condition that she shouldn't be married to somebody else, she broke that condition, right? If she broke that condition, then the divorce was no divorce. If the divorce was no divorce, the marriage with the first guy never ended. But if a married woman accepts a ring from somebody, she isn't going to be married to the second guy. She can't be married to two guys. So it's a misfire. What happened on day 15 at the wedding with the flowers and the band and everything else was only a misfire. Because according to your decision that she's married to the second guy, she was never divorced from the first guy, which then results in the conclusion that she isn't married to the second guy. So if you decide she's married to the second guy, it comes out that she isn't married to the second guy. Now that's not a problem. If A implies not A, you just conclude not A. But it works the other way around also. If you say she's not married to the second guy, she's not married to the second guy, then the condition that her first husband put on the divorce, you shouldn't be married to somebody for 30 days, is fulfilled. She didn't get married to him anyway for 30 days. And the condition is fulfilled, then the divorce is good. And the divorce is good, then the first marriage ended 15 days before, which means on day 15, she did marry the second guy, and she's married the second guy. That's a paradox. And that paradox is in the Rishonim. It's in the medieval commentators. And the resolution of it is she needs a new divorce document from both of them. In order to be free, she's got to have a divorce document from both of them. It is possible to construct logical paradoxes within the law. And you have to have a way of dealing with the law. And by the way, I heard this from Rabbi Soloveitchik, a million years ago when I had the privilege to hear things from him. When the word suffix sometimes doesn't mean I'm in doubt as to a piece of information. Suffix can mean there's nothing to do because I know everything that needs to be known. It's not a question of ignorance at all. Here's the example, which is it's in a Mishnah. Two women make someone their representative to receive Kidushin on their behalf. A man goes to this representative and says, here's my coin. With this coin, I'm betrothing one of them. And he gives the coin. What happens now? Nothing he said indicates which one. So we call it a suffix. Now, there's no doubt as what he said, no doubt as what he meant, no doubt as what he did, There's no doubt about any laws here. So it's as if there's a doubt in what the law is, and if you figured out what the law is, you could solve the problem. No, we know everything that needs to be known. It's just that, in a case like this, the outcome is not settled. It's just not settled. So there too, in order to settle it, she'll need a get from each one. So our commentators deal with these kinds of things. They're aware of paradoxes, they deal with these kinds of things. Last question, yeah.
So, the year 6000, like, that's when it's supposed to be definite by Moshiach, but, like, is it said that Moshiach is definitely going to be by 6000, or is it that it can also come beforehand? I don't fully understand.
Okay, there's two things to say here. Yes, it can come beforehand. Yes, absolutely. That would just be the limit by which he has to come. But he definitely could have. After all, Chazal say the king Chizkiyahu could have been the Mashiach. Had he composed a shira, a liturgical poem to celebrate the death and downfall of Sisera, he would have been the Mashiach. So since he could have been, obviously the tradition is not that he must come only on the year 6000, because that was long before 6000. But I should tell you that not everyone agrees on this 6,000-year limit. Yaakov Kamenetsky used to teach this to his students. Maimonides disagrees explicitly and says that there is no 6,000-year limit. And the Abarbanel agrees with him, also says so. So he said, if Chas v'sholom, the year 6000 comes, the Mashiach has not arrived, that will not be a refutation of traditional Judaism. Because it's a matter of disagreement among Maimonides is as big as they get, and he held no.
Is he saying that, though, so that people don't panic if 6000 comes? Or is he saying
Chas v'sholom. Leave that for your local reform rabbi. That's not our style. No, the Rambam said there is such a statement in the Talmud, but number one, it's not codified by the Talmud. There's a hilchasa that the law is decided as such, and there are other statements in the Talmud and in verses from the Tanakh which contradict it in the Rambam's eyes. And he says this is one opinion, but I think I have other sources which are more numerous and more reliable, and therefore I disregard it. The interesting point here, so Maisman pointed out to me, that he's treating the question of whether there's a 6,000-year limit or not like any legal issue. There were some people who want to say that in philosophy and so forth and so on, legal rules don't apply. Absolutely not. They apply everywhere. Okay.